the dwellers in Asgard. Far away and long ago, once there was another sun and another moon, a different sun and a different moon from the ones we see now. Sol was the name of that sun, and Mani was the name of that moon. But always behind Sol and Mani wolves went, a wolf behind each. The wolves caught on them at last, and they devoured Sol and Mani, and then the world was in darkness and cold. In those times the gods lived, Odin and Thor, Hodur and Balder, Tyr and Heimdall, Vidar and Vali, as well as Loki, the doer of good, and the doer of evil. And the beautiful goddesses were living then, Frigga Freya, Nanna Iduna, and Sif. But in the days when the sun and moon were destroyed, the gods were destroyed too. All the gods except Balder, who had died before that time, Vidar and Vali, the sons of Odin, and Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor. At that time too there were men and women in the world. But before the sun and the moon were devoured, and before the gods were destroyed, terrible things happened in the world. Snow fell on the four corners of the earth, and kept on falling for 3 seasons. Winds came and blew everything away. And the people of the world who had lived on in spite of the snow, and the cold and the winds fought each other, brother killing brother, until all the people were destroyed. Also there was another earth at that time, an earth green and beautiful. But the terrible winds that blew leveled down forests and hills and dwellings. Then fire came and burnt the earth. There was darkness, for the sun and the moon were devoured. The gods had met with their doom, and the time in which all these things happened was called Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. Then a new sun and a new moon appeared and went traveling through the heavens. They were more lovely than Sol and Mani, and no wolves followed behind them in chase. The earth became green and beautiful again, and in a deep forest that the fire had not burnt a woman and a man wakened up. They had been hidden there by Odin and left to sleep during Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. If was the woman's name, and Lifthrasir was the man's. They moved through the world, and their children and their children's children made people for the new earth. And of the gods were left Vidar and Vali, the sons of Odin, and Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor. On the new earth Vidar and Vali found tablets that the older gods had written on, and had left there for them, tablets telling of all that had happened before Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. And the people who lived after Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, were not troubled, as the people in the older days were troubled, by the terrible beings who had brought destruction upon the world, and upon men and women, and who from the beginning had waged war upon the gods. The building of the wall. Always there had been war between the giants and the gods, between the giants who would have destroyed the world and the race of men, and the gods who would have protected the race of men and would have made the world more beautiful. There are many stories to be told about the gods, but the first one that should be told to you is the one about the building of their city. The gods had made their way up to the top of a high mountain, and there they decided to build a great city for themselves that the giants could never overthrow. The city they would call Asgard, which means the place of the gods. They would build it on a beautiful plain that was on the top of that high mountain, and they wanted to raise round their city the highest and strongest wall that had ever been built. Now one day, when they were beginning to build their halls and their palaces, a strange being came to them. Odin, the father of the gods, went and spoke to him. "What dost thou want on the mountain of the gods?" he asked the stranger. "I know what is in the mind of the gods," the stranger said. "They would build a city here. I cannot build palaces, but I can build great walls that can never be overthrown. Let me build the wall round your city." "How long will it take you to build a wall that will go round our city?" said the father of the gods. "A year, Odin," said the stranger. Now Odin knew that if a great wall could be built around it, the gods would not have to spend all their time defending their city, Asgard, from the giants, and he knew that if Asgard were protected, he himself could go amongst men and teach them and help them. He thought that no payment the stranger could ask would be too much for the building of that wall. That day the stranger came to the council of the gods, and he swore that in a year he would have the great wall built. Then Odin made oath that the gods would give him what he asked in payment if the wall was finished to the last stone in a year from that day. The stranger went away and came back on the morrow. It was the first day of summer when he started work. He brought no one to help him, except a great horse. Now the gods thought that this horse would do no more than drag blocks of stone for the building of the wall. But the horse did more than this. He set the stones in their places and mortared them together. And day and night, and by light and dark, the horse worked. And soon a great wall was rising round the palaces that the gods themselves were building. What reward will the stranger ask for the work he is doing for us? The gods asked one another. Odin went to the stranger. We marvel at the work you and your horse are doing for us, he said. No one can doubt that the great wall of Asgard will be built up by the first day of summer. What reward do you claim? We would have it ready for you. The stranger turned from the work he was doing, leaving the great horse to pile up the blocks of stone. O father of the gods, he said, O Odin, the reward I shall ask for my work is the sun and the moon, and Freya, who watches over the flowers and grasses, for my wife. Now when Odin heard this he was terribly angered, for the price the stranger asked for his work was beyond all prices. He went amongst the other gods who were then building their shining palaces within the great wall, and he told them what reward the stranger had asked. The gods said, Without the sun and the moon, the world will wither away. And the goddesses said, Without Freya all will be gloom in Asgard. They would have let the wall remain unbuilt, rather than let the stranger have the reward he claimed for building it. But one who was in the company of the gods spoke. He was Loki, Bas, a being who only half belonged to the gods. His father was the wind giant. Let the stranger build the wall round Asgard, Loki said, and I will find a way to make him give up the hard bargain he has made with the gods. Go to him, and tell him that the wall must be finished by the first day of summer, and that if it is not finished to the last stone on that day, the price he asks will not be given to him. The gods went to the stranger, and they told him that if the last stone was not laid on the wall on the first day of the summer, not Sol or Mani, the sun and the moon, nor Freya would be given him. And now they knew that the stranger was one of the giants. The giant and his great horse piled up the wall more quickly than before. At night, while the giant slept, the horse worked on and on, hauling up stones and laying them on the wall with his great forefeet. And day by day, the wall around Asgard grew higher and higher. But the gods had no joy in seeing that great wall rising higher and higher around their palaces. The giant and his horse would finish the work by the first day of summer, and then he would take the sun and the moon, Sol and Mani, and Freya away with him. But Loki was not disturbed. He kept telling the gods that he would find a way to prevent him from finishing his work. And thus he would make the giant forfeit the terrible price he had led Odin to promise him. It was 3 days to summertime. All the wall was finished, except the gateway. Over the gateway a stone was still to be placed. And the giant, before he went to sleep, bade his horse haul up a great block of stone, so that they might put it above the gateway in the morning, and so finish the work 2 full days before summer. It happened to be a beautiful moonlit night that Svadilfare, the giant's great horse, was hauling the largest stone he ever hauled, when he saw a little mare come galloping toward him. The great horse had never seen so pretty a little mare, and he looked at her with surprise. "Svadilfare, slave," said the little mare to him, and went frisking pastoral. Svadilfare put down the stone he was hauling, and called to the little mare. She came back to him. "Why do you call me Svadilfare, slave?" said the great horse. "Because you have to work night and day for your master," said the little mare. "He keeps you working, 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 and never lets you enjoy yourself. You dare not leave that stone down, and come and play with me." "Who told you I dare not do it?" said Svadilfare. "I know you daren't do it," said the little mare, and she kicked up her heels and ran across the moonlit meadow. Now the truth is that Svadilfare was tired of working day and night. When he saw the little mare go galloping off, he became suddenly discontented. He left the stone he was hauling on the ground. He looked round, and he saw the little mare looking back at him. He galloped after her. He did not catch up on the little mare. She went on swiftly before him. On she went over the moonlit meadow, turning and looking back now and again at the great Svadilfare, who came heavily after her. Down the mountainside the mare went, and Svadilfare, who now rejoiced in his liberty, and in the freshness of the wind, and in the smell of the flowers, still followed her. With the morning's light they came near a cave, and the little mare went into it. They went through the cave. Then Svadilfare caught up on the little mare, and the two went wandering together, the little mare telling Svadilfare stories of the dwarfs and the elves. They came to a grove, and they stayed together in it, the little mare playing so nicely with him that the great horse forgot all about time passing. And while they were in the grove, the giant was going up and down, searching for his great horse. He had come to the wall in the morning, expecting to put the stone over the gateway and so finish his work. But the stone that was to be lifted up was not near him. He called for Svadilfare, but his great horse did not come. He went to search for him, and he searched all down the mountainside, and he searched as far across the earth as the realm of the giants. But he did not find Svadilfare. The gods saw the first day of summer come and the gateway of the wall stand unfinished. They said to each other that if it were not finished by the evening, they need not give Sol and Mani to the giant, nor the maiden Freya to be his wife. The hours of the summer day went past, and the giant did not raise the stone over the gateway. In the evening he came before them. "Your work is not finished," Odin said. "You forced us to a hard bargain, and now we need not keep it with you. You shall not be given Sol and Mani, nor the maiden Freya. Only the wall I have built is so strong I would tear it down," said the giant. He tried to throw down one of the palaces, but the gods laid hands on him and thrust him outside the wall he had built. "Go and trouble Asgard no more," Odin commanded. Then Loki returned to Asgard. He told the gods how he had transformed himself into a little mare, and had led away Svadilfare, the giant's great horse. And the gods sat in their golden palaces behind the great wall, and rejoiced that their city was now secure, and that no enemy could ever enter it or overthrow it. But Odin, the father of the gods, as he sat upon his throne, was sad in his heart, sad that the gods had got their wall built by a trick, that oaths had been broken, and that a blow had been struck in injustice in Asgard. Iduna and her apples. How Loki put the gods in danger. In Asgard there was a garden, and in that garden there grew a tree, and on that tree there grew shining apples. Thou knowst, O well-loved one, that every day that passes makes us older, and brings us to that day when we will be bent and feeble, gray-headed and weak-eyed. But those shining apples that grew in Asgard, they who ate of them every day grew never a day older, for the eating of the apples kept old age away. Dodis, the goddess, tended the tree on which the shining apples grew. None would grow on the tree unless she was there to tend it. No one but Iduna might pluck the shining apples. Each morning she plucked them, and left them in her basket, and every day the gods and goddesses came to her garden, that they might eat the shining apples, and so stay forever young. Iduna never went from her garden. All day and every day she stayed in the garden, or in her golden house beside it, and all day and every day she listened to Bragi, her husband, tell a story that never had an end. But a time came when Iduna and her apples were lost to Asgard, and the gods and goddesses felt old age approach them. How all that happened shall be told thee, O well-beloved. Odin, the father of the gods, often went into the land of men to watch over their doings. Once he took Loki with him, Loki, the doer of good and the doer of evil. For a long time they went traveling through the world of men. At last they came near Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. It was a bleak and empty region. There were no growing things there, not even trees with berries. There were no birds. There were no animals. As Odin, the father of the gods, and Loki, the doer of good and the doer of evil, went through this region, hunger came upon them. But in all the land around, they saw nothing that they could eat. Loki, running here and running there, came at last upon a herd of wild cattle. Creeping up on them, He caught hold of a young bull and killed him. Then he cut up the flesh into strips of meat. He lighted a fire and put the meat on spits to roast her. While the meat was being cooked, Odin, the father of the gods, a little way off, sat thinking on the things he had seen in the world of men. Loki made himself busy, putting more and more logs on the fire. At last he called to Odin, and the father of the gods came and sat down near the fire to eat the meal. But when the meat was taken off the cooking spits, and when Odin went to cut it, he found that it was still raw. He smiled at Loki for thinking the meat was cooked, and Loki, troubled that he had made a mistake, put the meat back, and put more logs upon the fire. Again Loki took the meat off the cooking spits, and called Odin to the meal. Odin, when he took the meat that Loki brought him, found that it was as raw as if it had never been put upon the fire. "Is this a trick of yours, Loki?" he said. Loki was so angry at the meat being uncooked that Odin saw he was playing no tricks. In his hunger, he raged at the meat, and he raged at the fire. Again he put the meat on the cooking spits, and put more logs on the fire. Every hour he would take up the meat, sure that it was now cooked. And every time he took it off, Odin would find that the meat was as raw as the first time they took it off the fire. Now Odin knew that the meat must be under some enchantment by the giants. He stood up and went on his way, hungry but strong. Loki, however, would not leave the meat that he had put back on the fire. He would make it be cooked, he declared, and he would not leave that place hungry. The dawn came, and he took up the meat again. As he was lifting it off the fire, he heard a whir of wings above his head. Looking up, he saw a mighty eagle, the largest eagle that ever appeared in the sky. The eagle circled round and round, and came above Loki's head. "Canst thou not cook thy food?" the eagle screamed to him. "I cannot cook it," said Loki. "I will cook it for thee, if thou wilt give me a share," screamed the eagle. "Come then, and cook it for me," said Loki. The eagle circled round until he was above the fire. Then flapping his great wings over it, he made the fire blaze and blaze. A heat that Loki had never felt before came from the burning logs. In a minute he drew the meat from the spits, and found it was well cooked. My share, give me my share," the eagle screamed at him. He flew down, and seizing on a large piece of meat, instantly devoured it. He seized on another piece. Piece after piece he devoured, until it looked as if Loki would be left with no meat for his meal. As the eagle seized on the last piece, Loki became angry indeed. Taking up the spit on which the meat had been cooked, he struck at the eagle. There was a clang, as if he had struck some metal. The wood of the spit did not come away. It stuck to the breast of the eagle, but Loki did not let go his hold on the spit. Suddenly the eagle rose up in the air. Loki, who held to the spit that was fastened to the eagle's breast, was drawn up with him. Before he knew what had happened, Loki was miles and miles up in the air, and the eagle was flying with him toward Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. And the eagle was screaming out, "Loki, friend Loki, I have thee at last. It was thou who didst cheat my brother of his reward for building the wall round Asgard. But Loki, I have thee at last. Know now that Thiassi the giant has captured thee, O Loki, most cunning of the dwellers in Asgard." Thus the eagle screamed as he went flying with Loki toward Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. They passed over the river that divides Jotunheim from Midgard, the world of men down, and now Loki saw a terrible place beneath him. A land of ice and rock-great mountains were there. They were lighted by neither sun nor moon, but by columns of fire thrown up now and again through cracks in the earth or out of the peaks of the mountains. Over a great iceberg the eagle hovered. Suddenly he shook the spit from his breast, and Loki fell down on the ice. The eagle screamed out to him, "Thou art in my power at last, O thou most cunning of all the dwellers in Asgard." The eagle left Loki there, and flew within a crack in the mountain. Miserable indeed was Loki upon that iceberg. The cold was deadly. He could not die there, for he was one of the dwellers in Asgard, and death might not come to him that way. He might not die, but he felt bound to that iceberg with chains of cold. After a day his captor came to him, not as an eagle this time, but in his own form. "Thiassi the giant, wouldst thou leave thine iceberg?" "Loki," he said, and return to thy pleasant place in Asgard? Thou dost delight in Asgard, although only by 1/2 dost thou belong to the gods. Thy father, Loki, was the wind giant? Oh, that I might leave this iceberg, Loki said, with the tears freezing on his face. Thou mayst leave it when thou showest thyself ready to pay thy ransom to me, said Thiassi. Thou wilt have to get me the shining apples that Iduna keeps in her basket. I cannot get Iduna's apples for thee, Thiassi, said Loki. Then stay upon the iceberg, said Thiassi the giant. He went away and left Loki there with the terrible winds buffeting him as with blows of a hammer. When Thiassi came again and spoke to him about his ransom, Loki said, There is no way of getting the shining apples from Iduna. There must be some way, O cunning Loki, said the giant, Iduna, although she guards well the shining apples, is simple-minded. Said Loki, It may be that I shall be able to get her to go outside the wall of Asgard. If she goes, she will bring her shining apples with her, for she never lets them go out of her hand, except when she gives them to the gods and goddesses to eat. Make it so that she will go beyond the wall of Asgard, said the giant. If she goes outside of the wall, I shall get the apples from her. Swear by the world tree that thou wilt lure Iduna beyond the wall of Asgard. Swear it, Loki, and I shall let thee go. I swear it by Yggdrasil, the world tree, that I will lure Iduna beyond the wall of Asgard, if thou wilt take me off this iceberg, said Loki. Then Thiassi changed himself into a mighty eagle, and taking Loki in his talons, he flew with him over the stream that divides Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, from Midgard, the world of men. He left Loki on the ground of Midgard, and Loki then went on his way to Asgard. Now Odin had already returned, and he had told the dwellers in Asgard of Loki's attempt to cook the enchanted meat. All laughed to think that Loki had been left hungry for all his cunning. Then when he came into Asgard, looking so famished, they thought it was because Loki had had nothing to eat. They laughed at him more and more, but they brought him into the feast hall, and they gave him the best of food with wine out of Odin's wine cup. When the feast was over, the dwellers in Asgard went to Iduna's garden as was their wont. There sat Iduna in the golden house that opened on her garden. Had she been in the world of men, everyone who saw her would have remembered their own innocence, seeing one who was so fair and good. She had eyes blue as the blue sky, and she smiled as if she were remembering lovely things she had seen or heard. The basket of shining apples was beside her. But to each god and goddess Iduna gave a shining apple. Each one ate the apple given, rejoicing to think that they would never become a day older. Then Odin, the father of the gods, said the runes that were always said in praise of Iduna, and the dwellers in Asgard went out of Iduna's garden, each one going to his or her own shining house. All went except Loki, the doer of good and the doer of evil. Loki sat in the garden, watching fair and simple Iduna. After a while she spoke to him and said, Why dost thou still stay here, wise Loki? To look well on thine apples. Loki said, I am wondering if the apples I saw yesterday are really as shining as the apples that are in thy basket. There are no apples in the world as shining as mine, said Iduna. The apples I saw were more shining, said Loki. Aye, and they smelled better. Iduna was troubled at what Loki, whom she deemed so wise, told her. Her eyes filled with tears that there might be more shining apples in the world than hers. Oh, Loki, she said, it cannot be. No apples are more shining, and none smell so sweet as the apples I pluck off the tree in my garden. Go then and see, said Loki. Just outside Asgard is the tree that has the apples I saw. Thou, Iduna, dost never leave thy garden, and so thou dost not know what grows in the world. Go outside of Asgard and see. I will go, Loki, said Iduna, the fair and simple. Iduna went outside the wall of Asgard. She went to the place Loki had told her that the apples grew in, but as she looked this way and that way, Iduna heard a whir of wings above her. Looking up, she saw a mighty eagle, the largest eagle that had ever appeared in the sky. She drew back toward the gate of Asgard. Then the great eagle swooped down. Iduna felt herself lifted up, and then she was being carried away from Asgard. Away, away, away over Midgard, where men lived, away toward the rocks and snows of Jotunheim, across the river that flows between the world of men and the realm of the giants. Iduna was born. Then the eagle flew into a cleft in a mountain, and Iduna was left in a cavernous hall, lighted up by columns of fire that burst up from the earth. The eagle loosened his grip on Iduna, and she sank down on the ground of the cavern. The wings and the feathers fell from him, and she saw her captor as a terrible giant. "Oh, why have you carried me off from Asgard and brought me to this place?" Iduna cried. "That I might eat your shining apples, Iduna," said Thiassi the giant. "That will never be, for I will not give them to you," said Iduna. "Give me the apples to eat, and I shall carry you back to Asgard." "No, no, that cannot be. I have been trusted with the shining apples, that I might give them to the gods only." "Then I shall take the apples from you," said Thiassi the giant. He took the basket out of her hands and opened it. But when he touched the apples, they shriveled under his hands. He left them in the basket, and he set the basket down. For he knew now that the apples would be no good to him unless Iduna gave them to him with her own hands. "You must stay with me here until you give me the shining apples," he said to her. Then was poor Iduna frightened. She was frightened of the strange cave, and frightened of the fire that kept bursting up out of the earth, and she was frightened of the terrible giant. But above all she was frightened to think of the evil that would fall upon the dwellers in Asgard if she were not there to give them the shining apples to eat. The giant came to her again, but still Iduna would not give him the shining apples, and there in the cave she stayed, the giant troubling her every day, and she grew more and more fearful as she saw in her dreams the dwellers in Asgard go to her garden, go there, and not being given the shining apples, feel and see a change coming over themselves and over each other. It was as Iduna saw it in her dreams. Every day the dwellers in Asgard went to her garden, Odin and Thor, Hodur and Balder, Tyr and Heimdall, Vidar and Vali, with Frigga, Freya, Nanna, and Sif. There was no one to pluck the apples of their tree, and a change began to come over the gods and goddesses. They no longer walked lightly. Their shoulders became bent. Their eyes no longer were as bright as dewdrops, and when they looked upon one another, they saw the change. Anger was coming upon the dwellers in Asgard. They knew that the time would come, and Frigga would be gray and old, when Sif's golden hair would fade, when Odin would no longer have his clear wisdom, and when Thor would not have strength enough to raise and fling his thunderbolts. And the dwellers in Asgard were saddened by this knowledge, and it seemed to them that all brightness had gone from their shining city. Where was Iduna, whose apples would give back youth and strength and beauty to the dwellers in Asgard? The gods had searched for her through the world of men. No trace of her did they find. But now Odin, searching through his wisdom, all means to get knowledge of where Iduna was hidden, he summoned his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, his two ravens that flew through the earth and through the realm of the giants, and that knew all things that were past and all things that were to come. He summoned Hugin and Munin, and they came, and one sat on his right shoulder, and one sat on his left shoulder, and they told him deep secrets. They told him of Thiassi and of his desire for the shining apples that the dwellers in Asgard ate, and of Loki's deception of Iduna, the fair and simple. What Odin learnt from his ravens was told in the council of the gods. Then Thor the strong went to Loki and laid hands upon him. When Loki found himself in the grip of the strong god, he said, "What wouldst thou with me, O Thor? I would hurl thee into a chasm in the ground, and strike thee with my thunder," said the strong god. "It was thou who didst bring it about, that Iduna went from Asgard." "O Thor," said Loki, "do not crush me with thy thunder. Let me stay in Asgard. I will strive to win Iduna back." "The judgment of the gods," said Thor, "is that thou, the cunning one, shouldst go to Jotunheim, and by thy craft win Iduna back from the giants. Go, or else I shall hurl thee into a chasm, and crush thee with my thunder." "I will go," said Loki. bought from Frigga, the wife of Odin. Loki borrowed the dress of falcon feathers that she owned. He clad himself in it and flew to Jotunheim in the form of a falcon. He searched through Jotunheim until he found Thiasse's daughter Skadi. He flew before Skadi, and he let the giant maid catch him and hold him as a pet. One day the giant maid carried him into the cave where Iduna, the fair and simple, was held. When Loki saw Iduna there, he knew that part of his quest was ended. Now he had to get Iduna out of Jotunheim and away to Asgard. He stayed no more with the giant maid, but flew up into the high rocks of the cave. Skadi wept for the flight of her pet, but she ceased to search and to call and went away from the cave. Then Loki, the doer of good and the doer of evil, flew to where Iduna was sitting and spoke to her. Iduna, when she knew that one of the dwellers in Asgard was near, wept with joy. Loki told her what she was to do. By the power of a spell that was given him, he was able to change her into the form of a sparrow. But before she did this, she took the shining apples out of her basket and flung them into places where the giant would never find them. Skadi, coming back to the cave, saw the falcon fly out with the sparrow beside him. She cried out to her father, and the giant knew that the falcon was Loki and the sparrow was Iduna. He changed himself into the form of a mighty eagle. By this time sparrow and falcon were out of sight, but Thiasse, knowing that he could make better flight than they, flew toward Asgard. Soon he saw them. They flew with all the power they had, but the great wings of the eagle brought him nearer and nearer to them. The dwellers in Asgard, standing on the wall, saw the falcon and the sparrow with the great eagle pursuing them. They knew who they were, Loki and Iduna with Thiasse in pursuit. As they watched the eagle winging nearer and nearer, the dwellers in Asgard were fearful that the falcon and the sparrow would be caught upon, and that Iduna would be taken again by Thiasse. They lighted great fires upon the wall, knowing that Loki would find a way through the fires, bringing Iduna with him, but that Thiasse would not find a way. The falcon and the sparrow flew toward the fires. Loki went between the flames and brought Iduna with him. And Thiasse, coming up to the fires and finding no way through, beat his wings against the flames. He fell down from the wall, and the death that came to him afterwards was laid to Loki. Thus Iduna was brought back to Asgard. Once again she sat in the golden house that opened to her garden. Once again she plucked the shining apples off the tree she tended, and once again she gave them to the dwellers in Asgard. And the dwellers in Asgard walked lightly again, and brightness came into their eyes and into their cheeks. Age no more approached them. Youth came back. Light and joy were again in Asgard. Sif's golden hair. How Loki wrought mischief in Asgard. All who dwelt in Asgard. The Aesir and the Asinir, who were the gods and the goddesses, and the Vanir, who were the friends of the gods and the goddesses, were wroth with Loki. It was no wonder they were wroth with him, for he had let the giant Thiasse carry off Iduna and her golden apples. It must be told that the show they made of their wrath made Loki ready to do more mischief in Asgard. One day he saw a chance to do mischief that made his heart rejoice. Sif, the wife of Thor, was lying asleep outside her house. Her beautiful golden hair flowed all round her. Loki knew how much Thor loved that shining hair, and how greatly Sif prized it because of Thor's love. Here was his chance to do a great mischief. Smilingly, he took out his shears and he cut off the shining hair, every strand and every tress. She did not waken while her treasure was being taken from her, but Loki left Sif's head cropped and bare. Thor was away from Asgard. Coming back to the city of the gods, he went into his house. Sif, his wife, was not there to welcome him. He called to Sif, but no glad answer came from her. To the palaces of all the gods and goddesses Thor went, but in none of them did he find Sif, his golden-haired wife. When he was coming back to his house, he heard his name whispered. He stopped, and then a figure stole out from behind a stone. A veil covered her head, and Thor scarce knew that this was Sif, his wife. As he went to her, she sobbed and sobbed. "Oh, Thor, my husband," she said, "do not look upon me. I am ashamed that you should see me. I shall go from Asgard and from the company of the gods and goddesses, and I shall go down to Svartheim, and live amongst the dwarfs. I cannot bear that any of the dwellers in Asgard should look upon me now." "O Sif," cried Thor, "what has happened to change you?" "I have lost the hair of my head," said Sif. "I have lost the beautiful golden hair that you, Thor, loved. You will not love me any more, and so I must go away, down to Svartheim, and to the company of the dwarfs. They are as ugly as I am now." Then she took the veil off her head, and Thor saw that all her beautiful hair was gone. She stood before him, shamed and sorrowful, and he grew into a mighty rage. "Who was it did this to you, Sif?" he said. "I am Thor, the strongest of all the dwellers in Asgard, and I shall see to it that all the powers the gods possess will be used to get your fairness back. Come with me, Sif." And taking his wife's hand in his, Thor went off to the council house, where the gods and the goddesses were. Sif covered her head with her veil, for she would not have the gods and goddesses look upon her shorn head. But from the anger in Thor's eyes all saw that the wrong done to Sif was great indeed. Then Thor told of the cutting of her beautiful hair. A whisper went round the council house. It was Loki did this. No one else in Asgard would have done a deed so shameful. One said to the other, "Loki it was who did it," said Thor. "He has hidden himself. But I shall find him, and I will slay him." "Nay, not so, Thor," said Odin, the father of the gods. "Nay, no dweller in Asgard may slay another. I shall summon Loki to come before us here. It is for you to make him, and remember that Loki is cunning and able to do many things. Bring back to Sif the beauty of her golden hair." Then the call of Odin, the call that all in Asgard have to hearken to, went through the city of the gods. Loki heard it, and he had to come from his hiding place and enter the house where the gods held their council. And when he looked on Thor and saw the rage that was in his eyes, and when he looked on Odin and saw the sternness in the face of the father of the gods, he knew that he would have to make amends for the shameful wrong he had done to Sif. Said Odin, "There is a thing that you, Loki, have to do. Restore to Sif the beauty of her hair." Loki looked at Odin. Loki looked at Thor, and he saw that what was said would have to be done. His quick mind searched to find a way of restoring to Sif the beauty of her golden hair. "I shall do as you command, Odin Allfather," he said. "But before we tell you of what Loki did to restore the beauty of Sif's golden hair, we must tell you of the other beings besides the gods and the goddesses who were in the world at the time. First, there was the Vanir. When the gods, who were called the Asir, came to the mountain on which they built Asgard, they found other beings there. These were not wicked and ugly like the giants. They were beautiful and friendly. The Vanir they were named. Although they were beautiful and friendly, the Vanir had no thought of making the world more beautiful or more happy. In that way they differed from the Asir, who had such a thought. The Asir made peace with them, and they lived together in friendship. And the Vanir came to do things that helped the Asir to make the world more beautiful and more happy. Freya, whom the giant wanted to take away with the sun and the moon as a reward for the building of the wall round Asgard, was of the Vanir. The other beings of the Vanir were Frey, who was the brother of Freya, and Njord, who was their father. On the earth below there were other beings, the dainty elves, who danced and fluttered about, attending to the trees and flowers and grasses. The Vanir were permitted to rule over the elves. Then below the earth, in caves and hollows, there was another race, the dwarfs or gnomes, little, twisted creatures, who were both wicked and ugly, but who were the best craftsmen in the world. In the days when neither the Asir nor the Vanir were friendly to him, Loki used to go down to Svartheim, the dwarfs' dwelling below the earth. And now that he was commanded to restore to Sif the beauty of her hair, Loki thought of help he might get from the dwarfs. Down, down, through the winding passages in the earth he went, and he came at last to where the dwarfs who were most friendly to him were working in their forges. All the dwarfs were master smiths, and when he came upon his friends, he found them working hammer and tongs, beating metals into many shapes. He watched them for a while and took note of the things they were making. One was a spear, so well balanced and made that it would hit whatever mark it was thrown, and no matter how bad the aim the thrower had. The other was a boat that could sail on any sea, but that could be folded up so that it would go into one's pocket. The spear was called Gungnir, and the boat was called Skidbladnir. Loki made himself very agreeable to the dwarfs, praising their work and promising them things that only the dwellers in Asgard could give, things that the dwarfs longed to possess. He talked to them till the little, ugly folk thought that they would come to own Asgard and all that was in it. At last, Loki said to them, "Have you got a bar of fine gold that you can hammer into threads? Into threads so fine that they will be like the hair of Sif, Thor's wife. Only the dwarfs could make a thing so wonderful. Ah, there's the bar of gold. Hammer it into those fine threads, and the gods themselves will be jealous of your work." Flattered by Loki's speeches, the dwarfs who were in the forge took up the bar of fine gold and flung it into the fire. Then taking it out and putting it upon their anvil, they worked on the bar with their tiny hammers until they beat it into threads that were as fine as the hairs of one's head. But that was not enough. They had to be as fine as the hairs on Sif's head, and these were finer than anything else. They worked on the threads over and over again until they were as fine as the hairs on Sif's head. The threads were as bright as sunlight, and when Loki took up the mass of worked gold, it flowed from his raised hand down on the ground. It was so fine that it could be put into his palm, and it was so light that a bird might not feel its weight. Then Loki praised the dwarfs more and more, and he made more and more promises to them. He charmed them all, although they were an unfriendly and a suspicious folk. And before he left them, he asked them for the spear and the boat he had seen them make, the spear Gungnir and the boat Skidbladnir. The dwarfs gave him these things, though in a while after they wondered at themselves for giving them. Back to Asgard Loki went. He walked into the council house, where the dwellers in Asgard were gathered. He met the stern look in Odin's eyes, and the rageful look in Thor's eyes, with smiling good humor. "Off with thy veil, O Sif," he said. And when poor Sif took off her veil, he put upon her shorn head the wonderful mass of gold he held in his palm. Over her shoulders the gold fell, fine, soft, and shining as her own hair. And the Aesir and the Asinur, the gods and the goddesses, and Van and Vana, when they saw Sif's head covered again with the shining web, laughed and clapped their hands in gladness. And the shining web held to Sif's head as if indeed it had roots and was growing there. How Brock brought judgment on Loki. It was then that Loki, with the wish of making the Aesir and the Vanir friendly to him once more, brought out the wonderful things he had gained from the dwarfs, the spear Gungnir and the boat Skidbladnir. The Aesir and the Vanir marveled at things so wonderful. Loki gave the spear as a gift to Odin and to Frey, who was chief of the Vanir. He gave the boat Skidbladnir. All Asgard rejoiced that things so wonderful and so helpful had been brought to them, and Loki, who had made a great show in giving these gifts, said boastingly, "None but the dwarfs who work for me could make such things. There are other dwarfs, but they are as unhandy as they are misshapen. The dwarfs who are my servants are the only ones who can make such wonders." Now Loki in his boastfulness had said a foolish thing. There were other dwarfs besides those who had worked for him, and one of these was there in Asgard. All unknown to Loki, he stood in the shadow of Odin's seat, listening to what was being said. Now he went over to Loki, his little, unshapely form trembling with rage. "Brock, the most spiteful of all the dwarfs. Ha! Loki, you boaster," he roared. "You lie in your words. Sindri, my brother, who would scorn to serve you, is the best smith in Svartheim." The Aesir and the Vanir laughed to see Loki outfaced by Brock, the dwarf in the middle of his boastfulness. As they laughed, Loki grew angry. "Be silent, dwarf," he said. "Your brother will know about smith's work when he goes to the dwarfs who are my friends, and learns something from them. He learned from the dwarfs who are your friends. My brother Sindri learned from the dwarfs who are your friends." Brock roared in a greater rage than before. "The things you have brought out of Svartheim would not be noticed by the Aesir and the Vanir if they were put beside the things that my brother Sindri can make. Sometime we will try your brother Sindri, and see what he can do," said Loki. Try now, Brock shouted. I'll wager my head against yours, Loki, that his work will make the dwellers in Asgard laugh at your boasting. I will take your wager, said Loki, my head against yours, and glad will I be to see that ugly head of yours off your misshapen shoulders. The Aesir will judge whether my brother's work is not the best that ever came out of Svartheim, and they will see to it that you will pay your wager, Loki, the head off your shoulders. Will ye not sit in judgment, O dwellers in Asgard? We will sit in judgment, said the Aesir. Then, still full of rage, Brock the dwarf went down to Svartheim, and to the place where his brother, Sindri, worked. There was Sindri in his glowing forge, working with bellows and anvil and hammers beside him, and around him masses of metal, gold and silver, copper and iron. Brock told his tale, how he had wagered his head against Loki's, that Sindri could make things more wonderful than the spear and the boat that Loki had brought into Asgard. You were right in what you said, my brother, said Sindri, and you shall not lose your head to Loki. But the two of us must work at what I am going to forge. It will be your work to keep the fire, so that it will neither blaze up nor die down for a single instant. If you can keep the fire as I tell you, we will forge a wonder. Now, brother, keep your hands upon the bellows and keep the fire under your control. Then, into the fire Sindri threw not a piece of metal, but a pig's skin. Brock kept his hands on the bellows, working it so that the fire neither died down nor blazed up for a single instant. And in the glowing fire the pigskin swelled itself into a strange shape. But Brock was not left to work the bellows in peace. Into the forge flew a gadfly. It lighted on Brock's hands and stung them. The dwarf screamed with pain, but his hand still held the bellows, working it to keep the fire steady, for he knew that the gadfly was Loki, and that Loki was striving to spoil Sindri's work. Again the gadfly stung his hands, but Brock, although his hands felt as if they were pierced with hot irons, still worked the bellows so that the fire did not blaze up or die down for a single instant. Sindri came and looked into the fire. Over the shape that was rising there, he said words of magic. The gadfly had flown away, and Sindri bade his brother cease working. He took out the thing that had been shaped in the fire, and he worked over it with his hammer. It was a wonder indeed, a boar, all golden, that could fly through the air, and that shed light from its bristles as it flew. Brock forgot the pain in his hands, and screamed with joy. This is the greatest of wonders, he said. The dwellers in Asgard will have to give the judgment against Loki. I shall have Loki's head. But Sindri said, the boar golden bristle may not be judged as great a wonder as the spear Gungnir or the boat Skidbladnir. We must make something more wonderful still. Work the bellows as before, brother, and do not let the fire die down or blaze up for a single instant. Then Sindri took up a piece of gold that was so bright it lightened up the dark cavern that the dwarfs worked in. He threw the piece of gold into the fire. Then he went to make ready something else, and left Brock to work the bellows. The gadfly flew in again. Brock did not know it was there until it lighted on the back of his neck. It stung him till Brock felt the pain was wrenching him apart, but still he kept his hands on the bellows, working it so that the fire neither blazed up nor died down for a single instant. When Sindri came to look into the fire, Brock was not able to speak for pain. Again Sindri said magic words over the gold that was being smelted in the fire. He took it out of the glow and worked it over on the main anvil. Then in a while he showed Brock something that looked like the circle of their sun. A splendid arm ring, my brother, he said. An arm ring for a god's right arm. And this ring has hidden wonders. Every 9th night, 8 rings like itself will drop from this arm ring, for this is dropped near, the ring of increase, to Odin, the father of the gods. The ring shall be given, said Brock, and Odin will have to declare that nothing so wonderful or so profitable to the gods was ever brought into Asgard. O Loki, cunning Loki, I shall have thy head in spite of thy tricks. Be not too hasty, brother, said Sindri. What we have done so far is good, but better still must be the thing that will make the dwellers in Asgard give the judgment that delivers Loki's head to thee. Work as before, brother, and do not let the fire blaze up or die down for a single instant. This time, Sindri threw into the fire a bar of iron. Then he went away to fetch the hammer that would shape it. Brock worked the bellows as before, but only his hands were steady, for every other part of him was trembling with expectation of the gadfly's sting. He saw the gadfly dart into the forge. He screamed as it flew round and round him, searching out a place where it might sting him most fearfully. It lighted down on his forehead just between his eyes. The first sting it gave took the sight from his eyes. It stung again, and Brock felt the blood flowing down. Darkness filled the cave. Brock tried to keep his hands steady on the bellows, but he did not know whether the fire was blazing up or dying down. He shouted, and Sindri hurried up. Sindri said the magic words over the thing that was in the fire. Then he drew it out. An instant more, he said, and the work would have been perfect. But because you let the fire die down for an instant, the work is not as good as it might have been made. He took what was shaped in the fire to the main anvil and worked over it. Then when Brock's eyesight came back to him, he saw a great hammer, a hammer all of iron. The handle did not seem to be long enough to balance the head. This was because the fire had died down for an instant, while it was being formed. "The hammer is Mjolnir," said Sindri, "and it is the greatest of the things that I am able to make. All in Asgard must rejoice to see this hammer. Thor only will be able to wield it. Now I am not afraid of the judgment that the dwellers in Asgard will give." "The dwellers in Asgard will have to give judgment for us," Brock cried out. "They will have to give judgment for us, and the head of Loki, my tormentor, will be given me. No more wonderful or more profitable gifts than these have ever been brought into Asgard." Sindri said, "Thy head is saved, and thou wilt be able to take the head of Loki, who was insolent to us. Bring it here, and we will throw it into the fire in the forge." The Aesir and the Vanir were seated in the council house of Asgard, when a train of dwarfs appeared before them. Brock came at the head of the train, and he was followed by a band of dwarfs, carrying things of great weight. Brock and his attendants stood round the throne of Odin, and hearkened to the words of the father of the gods. "We know why you have come into Asgard from out of Svartheim," Odin said. "You have brought things wonderful and profitable to the dwellers in Asgard. Let what you have brought be seen, Brock. If they are more wonderful and more useful than the things Loki has brought out of Svartheim, the spear Gungnir and the boat Skidbladnir, we will give judgment for you." Then Brock commanded the dwarfs who waited on him to show the dwellers in Asgard the first of the wonders that Sindri had made. They brought out the boar, Golden Bristle. Round and round the council house the boar flew, leaving a track of brightness. The dwellers in Asgard said one to the other that this was a wonder indeed, but none would say that the boar was a better thing to have in Asgard than the spear that would hit the mark, no matter how badly it was flung, or the boat Skidbladnir that would sail on any sea, and that could be folded up so small that it would fit in anyone's pocket. None would say that Golden Bristle was better than these wonders. To Frey, who was chief of the Vanir, Brock gave the wondrous boar. Then the attending dwarf showed the arm ring that was as bright as the circle of the sun. All admired the noble ring, and when it was told how every 9th night this ring dropped 8 rings of gold that were like itself, the dwellers in Asgard spoke aloud, all saying that Draupnir, the ring of increase, was a wonder indeed, hearing their voices raised. Brock looked triumphantly at Loki, who was standing there with his lips drawn closely together. To Odin, the father of the gods, Brock gave the noble arm ring. Then he commanded the attending dwarfs to lay before Thor the hammer Mjolnir. Thor took the hammer up and swung it around his head. As he did so, he uttered a great cry, and the eyes of the dwellers in Asgard lightened up when they saw Thor with the hammer Mjolnir in his hands. Their eyes lightened up, and from their lips came the cry, "This is a wonder indeed." With this hammer in his hand, none can withstand Thor, our champion. No greater thing has ever come into Asgard than the hammer Mjolnir. Then Odin, the father of the gods, spoke from his throne, giving judgment. "The hammer Mjolnir that the dwarf Brock has brought into Asgard is a thing wonderful indeed, and profitable to the gods. In Thor's hands it can crush mountains, and hurl the giant race from the ramparts of Asgard. Sindri the dwarf has forged a greater thing than the spear Gungnir and the boat Skidbladnir. There can be no other judgment. Brock looked at Loki, showing his gnarled teeth. Now, Loki, yield your head, he cried. Do not ask such a thing, said Odin. Put any other penalty on Loki for mocking you and tormenting you. Make him yield to you the greatest thing that it is in his power to give. Not so, not so, screamed Brock. You dwellers in Asgard would shield one another. But what of me? Loki would have taken my head, had I lost the wager. Loki has lost his head to me. Let him kneel down now till I cut it off. Loki came forward smiling with closed lips. I kneel before you, dwarf, he said. Take off my head, but be careful. Do not touch my neck. I did not bargain that you should touch my neck. If you do, I shall call upon the dwellers in Asgard to punish you. Brock drew back with a snarl. Is this the judgment of the gods? He asked. Bargain you made, Brock, said Odin, was an evil one, and all its evil consequences you must bear. Brock, in a rage, looked upon Loki, and he saw that his lips were smiling. He stamped his feet and raged. Then he went up to Loki and said, I may not take your head, but I can do something with your lips that mock me. What would you do, dwarf? Asked Thor. Sew Loki's lips together, said Brock, so that he can do no more mischief with his talk. You dwellers in Asgard cannot forbid me to do this. Down, Loki, on your knees before me. Loki looked round on the dwellers in Asgard, and he saw that their judgment was that he must kneel before the dwarf. He knelt down with a frown upon his brow. Draw your lips together, Loki, said Brock. Loki drew his lips together while his eyes flashed fire. With an awl that he took from his belt, Brock pierced Loki's lips. He took out a thong and tightened them together. Then in triumph, the dwarf looked on. Loki, oh Loki, he said, you boasted that the dwarfs who worked for you were better craftsmen than Sindri. My brother taught your words have been shown to be lies, and now you cannot boast for a while. Then Brock the dwarf, with great majesty, walked out of the council house of Asgard, and the attending dwarfs marched behind him in procession. Down the passages in the earth the dwarfs went, singing the song of Brock's triumph over Loki. And in Svartheim it was told forever, after how Sindri and Brock had prevailed in Asgard. Now that Loki's lips were closed, there was peace and a respite from mischief. No one amongst the Aesir or the Vanir were sorry when Loki had to walk about in silence with his head bent low.